Remember when Marlon Brando stroked that cat and made an offer nobody could refuse? This film was nearly shot in Kansas City, written by a first-time screenwriter escaping gambling debt. Today, we're counting down 20 weird facts you never knew about The Godfather. Number 20. Mario Puzo did not sit down to write a masterpiece. He sat down to survive. At 45 years old, he was a government clerk with 5 children, $20,000 in debt to bookmakers and loan sharks, and 2 critically praised but commercially invisible novels behind him. He later admitted openly, "I was 45 years old and tired of being an artist. It was really time to grow up and sell out." Paramount Vatsev P. Peter Bart bought the film rights when the manuscript was only 60 unfinished pages, with the working title, Mafia. The price was $12,500. Puzo's agent told him to reject the offer. He took it anyway because he owed $10,000 to bookies that same week. Here is where it gets remarkable. When Paramount hired him to write the screenplay for $100,000, Puzo had never written a screenplay in his life, not once. He learned as he went in collaboration with Francis Ford Coppola, and the two of them went on to win Academy Awards for screenwriting across parts 1 and 2. After the second win, Puzo reportedly bought a how-to guide on screenwriting. The first page declared that the best screenplay ever written was The Godfather. He threw the book away. The screenplay later made the Writers Guild of America's list of the 101 greatest ever written. Not bad for a man who started it to pay off a gambling debt by Friday. Number 19. The Godfather, as audiences know it, feels inevitable. The period setting, the New York streets, the sweeping Sicilian landscapes, the nearly 3-hour running time. None of it was supposed to exist. Studio executives originally planned a 90-minute, $2 million film set in contemporary 1972. Production would be shot either on the Paramount backlot or in Kansas City, standing in for New York. As for Sicily, the plan was to film those sequences in the Adirondacks. Everything that defines the film's grandeur was, from the studio's perspective, completely unnecessary. The initial budget landed somewhere between $2 and $2.5 million. As Mario Puzo's novel became a cultural phenomenon, 67 weeks on the bestseller list and 9 million copies sold in its first 2 years, the budget crept towards $6.5 million. Still modest by Hollywood standards, but triple the original plan. Francis Ford Coppola fought for every element the studio wanted to eliminate: the 1940s period setting, the authentic New York exterior locations, the on-location Sicily production, the longer running time. Every sweeping establishing shot audiences remember was the result of a creative battle won against the studio's instincts, not a shared vision between filmmaker and studio. Coppola delivered the finished film in 77 shooting days, 6 days under schedule. He beat the clock and made the film his way, and Coppola was not even the studio's first choice. Number 18. The Godfather was Hollywood's most rejected directing job. The list of those who passed before Francis Ford Coppola accepted is remarkable. Sergio Leone declined because he was already developing his own gangster epic, which eventually became Once Upon a Time in America. Peter Bogdanovich said the Mafia simply did not interest him. Arthur Penn, Costa Gavras, Otto Preminger, Franklin J. Schaffner, Elia Kazan, Fred Zinnemann, and Richard Lester all passed. Most viewed romanticizing organized crime as morally objectionable. Others had scheduling conflicts. At least 12 directors turned down the material that became the greatest American film. Peter Bart, then a Paramount VP, suggested Coppola for 2 reasons. He was Italian-American, which mattered to the project's authenticity, and he would work cheap. Coppola's production company, American Zoetrope, owed Warner Brothers over $400,000 from cost overruns on THX 1138, and he needed the income badly. There was just one problem. Coppola did not want to do it either. He had stopped reading Puzo's novel at page 50, put off by the graphic content, and dismissed it as pretty cheap stuff. He turned the project down at first. His friend George Lucas eventually convinced him to reconsider. The argument was practical. They needed the money to keep Zoetrope alive. Coppola was 31 years old with no commercial hits on his record. He accepted for $125,000 plus 6% of gross rentals. Every directorial choice audiences considered genius was made by someone who initially did not want the job. Number 17. Among all the actors who wanted to play Vito Corleone, the strangest story belongs not to Laurence Olivier, not to Burt Lancaster, and not even to Frank Sinatra. It belongs to Danny Thomas. According to research by Mark Seal and reporting in Smithsonian Magazine, Thomas wanted to purchase a controlling interest in Paramount Pictures, specifically so he could cast himself as Don Corleone. Studio executives actually entertained the idea, hoping Thomas's production company would merge with the studio. Thomas ultimately declined, and in a twist almost too perfect to believe, urged the studio to cast Marlon Brando. Orson Welles mounted his own campaign, attempting to convince Mario Puzo directly that he was the obvious choice for the role. Coppola felt guilty enough about turning Welles down that he later offered him the Colonel Kurtz role in Apocalypse Now. Welles turned that down too. Meanwhile, studio president Stanley Jaffe issued a formal prohibition. His exact words, "As the president of Paramount Pictures, I must tell you now that under no circumstances will Marlon Brando appear in The Godfather." Coppola reportedly fainted, or at least staged a convincing fall upon hearing the ultimatum. The role was so coveted, it drove one actor toward attempted corporate acquisition and provoked a studio-wide ban on the eventual winner's name. The Don audiences cannot imagine being played by anyone else was nearly a comedian who tried to buy the studio to cast himself. Number 16. Coppola knew that asking Marlon Brando to submit to a formal screen test would be an insult. Brando was one of the most celebrated actors alive. Asking him to audition like a newcomer was a non-starter, so Coppola did not ask. He reframed it entirely. He gathered a small camera crew, drove to Brando's home on Mulholland Drive, and described the visit as a makeup test. What followed became one of cinema's most legendary moments of preparation. Brando emerged wearing a Japanese kimono with long blonde hair in a ponytail. In front of the camera, he slicked his hair back with shoe polish, stuffed Kleenex into his cheeks to simulate heavy jowls, and began speaking in a slow, raspy whisper. His reasoning: the character had been shot in the throat at some point in his past. When Coppola screened the footage, Gulf and Western chairman Charles Bluedorn initially recoiled. Then he watched the transformation take shape and said simply, "That's amazing." Producer Robert Evans, who had fought against Brando's involvement, watched the same footage and did not recognize him. His response: "He looks Italian? Fine. But who is he?" Brando's deal was $50,000 for 6 weeks, plus 5% of the film's gross profits. He later sold those profit points back to Paramount for just $300,000, forfeiting millions in what remains one of the worst financial decisions in Hollywood history. Number 15. The visual language of The Godfather feels like deliberate artistic genius. Faces half-lit in candlelight, eyes buried in shadow, the Rembrandt quality of every interior scene. It looks like the work of someone who planned every shadow for years. The reality is considerably more practical. Cinematographer Gordon Willis, nicknamed the Prince of Darkness by fellow cinematographer Conrad Hall, created the film's revolutionary look under a specific constraint. Brando's prosthetic dental appliance only looked convincing when lit from directly above. That overhead lighting cast the famous shadows over the Don's eyes. The darkness that audiences read as menace and mystery began as a solution to a makeup problem. Willis explained it plainly. The design behind all of that came out of Marlon Brando, because Marlon had this makeup stuff he was using, so top light seemed to be the most effective way of dealing with him. You don't really want to see his eyes. He also made a deliberate additional choice, progressively darkening the lighting on Michael's face as the character descended deeper into criminality, literally driving him into shadow as the story progressed. Paramount executives panicked. Willis recalled, "We got huge flack from Paramount. It even made Francis Ford Coppola nervous." Willis held firm. He maintained it was proper exposure, not underexposure, and refused to change it. The Oscar treatment Willis received is staggering. Across 7 years from 1971 to 1977, he shot 6 films that earned 39 Academy Award nominations and 19 wins, including 3 Best Picture. Number 14. Francis Ford Coppola was on the verge of being fired on 3 or 4 separate occasions during production. He said later, "Had I not won the Oscar for Patton, I would absolutely have been fired from The Godfather." The studio had Elia Kazan on standby as a replacement director, ready to step in the moment Coppola was removed. The situation escalated into a preemptive strike. Coppola received a tip that studio executives planned to fire him on a Friday, which was the standard industry practice because it gave the studio the weekend to bring in a replacement by Monday. Coppola moved first. On Wednesday, he fired nearly his entire staff. His reasoning: "I figured this way they can't fire me. I am the only one left who knows what's going on." He described the strategy in terms drawn directly from the film he was making. "Like The Godfather, I fired people as a preemptive strike. The people who were angling the most to have me fired, I had fired. Brando added another layer of protection. He made clear that if Coppola was removed, he would walk. The combination of Brando's loyalty, Coppola's preemptive purge, and the stunning footage from the restaurant scene ultimately secured the director's position. On Oscar night in 1971, Coppola watched the ceremony with Martin Scorsese. Scorsese looked at him and said, "How are they going to fire you now?" The patent win provided temporary cover. Number 13. Joseph Colombo Sr., head of the Colombo crime family, did not simply object to The Godfather. He organized a campaign to destroy it. Colombo had founded the Italian-American Civil Rights League in 1970, which grew to 40,000 dues-paying members and staged a rally of 50,000 to 100,000 people at Columbus Circle. The league successfully pressured U.S. Attorney General John Mitchell to ban the words mafia and Cosa Nostra from federal government documents. When Colombo learned Paramount was filming The Godfather, the pressure turned physical. Producer Al Ruddy's car was shot full of holes. Bomb threats evacuated Gulf and Western headquarters twice. Ruddy kept a loaded handgun in his desk drawer. Ruddy brokered a deal. References to mafia and Cosa Nostra were removed from the script in exchange for the mob allowing production to proceed. When Gulf and Western discovered Ruddy had made a handshake agreement with organized crime, their stock price dropped and Ruddy was fired, then rehired at Coppola's insistence. On June 28, 1971, an assassin named Jerome Johnson shot Colombo 3 times in the head at Columbus Circle, 4 blocks from where The Godfather was filming that day. The scene being shot at that moment was Michael ordering the hits on the heads of the 5 families. Carlo Gambino reportedly watched from a cafe across the street as Brando's shooting scene was filmed. Real mobsters on set critiqued the actor's gun handling. Number 12. Luca Brasi's fumbling, sweating rehearsal of his speech before approaching the Don reads as brilliant character detail. A fearsome man, humbled in the presence of someone more powerful. It feels like precise, controlled acting. It was neither precise nor controlled. Lenny Montana, born Leonardo Passafaro in Brooklyn in 1926, was a 6'6", 320-pound former professional wrestler who had performed as the Zebra Kid. After wrestling, he became an enforcer and arsonist for the Colombo crime family and served time at Rikers Island. He arrived on The Godfather set not as an actor, but as a bodyguard for a mob associate sent to ensure the word mafia was never spoken on film. Coppola spotted him and, according to Vanity Fair, fell in love with him immediately, casting him as Luca Brasi on the spot. The problem: Montana was so terrified of acting opposite Marlon Brando that he flubbed his lines across an entire day of filming. Rather than reshoot repeatedly, Coppola wrote and filmed the scene of Luca rehearsing his speech outside the Don study to retroactively justify the stammering. A scene was invented to explain a real mobster's genuine paralysis. Montana regaled the cast with arson stories during breaks. When a producer broke her watch, Montana arranged delivery of an antique diamond-encrusted timepiece wrapped in tissues, accompanied by a note: "The boys sent you this, but don't wear it in Florida." Number 11. The image of Don Corleone stroking a cat in his darkened study is one of cinema's most analyzed frames. The killer cradling a kitten, warmth and menace in a single composition. Film scholars have written pages on its symbolic weight. None of that symbolism was intentional. The cat was never in the script. Coppola found it wandering the lot at Filmways Studios in Harlem, where it was kept for rodent control. He picked it up moments before cameras rolled and placed it in Brando's hands without explanation. Brando, a known animal lover, improvised, petting it naturally and completely. The problem revealed itself in post-production. The cat was so content that it purred loudly enough to muffle most of Brando's dialogue. His lines in that scene had to be looped entirely in a recording studio after filming wrapped. What audiences hear in that opening is not the audio captured on set. Coppola has stated clearly that none of the symbolism associated with the image was intentional. The juxtaposition of tenderness and menace was real, but it was the product of a stray rodent control animal wandering into frame at the right moment, not a directorial choice. The most studied visual in the film's opening sequence was an accident that destroyed the original audio, and it produced one of cinema's most enduring images. Think about that the next time that opening scene hits you. Not every accident on this production turned into art, though. All right, we're at the halfway mark, and things are about to get even wilder. Before we hit the top 10, I want to hear from you. What's your favorite Godfather quote or moment? Drop it in the comments. And if you're enjoying this, smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help the channel grow. Number 10. For decades, film scholars and audiences have identified oranges as a deliberate death motif woven through The Godfather. They appear at Waltz's dinner table. They roll across the pavement as Vito is shot. Vito tucks orange peel into his mouth to frighten his grandson moments before he dies. The pattern feels intentional and precise, except it was not. In his director's commentary for Part 2, Francis Ford Coppola admitted the orange pattern started out as an accident. Production designer Dean Tavoularis chose oranges because Gordon Willis shot with such minimal light that bright, warm colors provided necessary visual contrast in dark scenes. That is the entire explanation. For Coppola personally, oranges also represented a symbol of Italy, something warm and Mediterranean and familial. But the connection to death was a fan and critical interpretation that emerged entirely after the film was released. Coppola has acknowledged this directly. Once scholars and audiences identified the pattern, Coppola deliberately deployed oranges as a death symbol in the sequels. That was an intentional choice, made in response to what viewers had already decided the original meant. But in the first film, the oranges were there because Willis needed color contrast. The orange that falls from Vito's grasp as he dies, every orange in the frame throughout the film, originated as a solution to a cinematographic problem, not a directorial statement. Generations of film students have written papers about intentional symbolism that was a happy accident. Number 9. Nino Rota's score for The Godfather is among the most recognizable pieces of film music ever recorded. The love theme alone has been quoted, covered, and referenced in popular culture for 50 years. That score was nominated for Best Original Score at the 45th Academy Awards. Then it was stripped. An anonymous tipster informed the Academy that the beloved love theme was a reworked version of music Rota had already composed for Edoardo De Filippo's 1958 Italian comedy, Fortunella. In that film, the melody served as an upbeat, ironic march. Rota had slowed it down and transformed it into the haunting, romantic signature of The Godfather. Film historian John Burlingame described the situation plainly. Someone, to this day, we don't know who, blew the whistle on him. The replacement nominee was John Addison's score for Sloth. The actual Oscar that year went to Charlie Chaplin's Limelight, a film made in 1952 that became eligible only because it had not screened in Los Angeles until 1972. 2 years later, Rota won the Oscar for The Godfather Part 2, shared with Carmine Coppola. Despite that score extensively reusing music from the first film, Burlingame described the Part 2 win as a kind of apology. There is one more layer. Robert Evans had tried to replace Rota entirely before the film was finished, calling the original score too highbrow and suggesting Henry Mancini instead. Coppola threatened to quit. Evans backed down. Number 8. The quiet conversation between Vito and Michael in the sunlit garden is widely considered the emotional heart of The Godfather. Two men tending tomato plants, the aging Don passing wisdom to his son. The only extended scene in the film where Vito is diminished and Michael is ascending. It is the scene that makes the tragedy of everything that follows feel inevitable. Robert Towne wrote it. He received no credit. Towne, who would later write Chinatown, crafted this intimate farewell between father and son at Francis Ford Coppola's request. The Puzo and Coppola screenplay won the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay. Its most celebrated scene was written by someone whose name appears nowhere in the credits. The scene's power comes from what it refuses to do. There is no violence, no threat, no demonstration of power. There are two men and some tomato plants, and a conversation about succession and regret. Towne created the emotional counterweight that gives every act of violence in the film its meaning. Without this scene, the ending does not land the same way. The most celebrated screenplay in American cinema contains its most celebrated scene courtesy of an uncredited writer who received no Oscar, no industry recognition, and no public acknowledgement for decades. Turns out, the award-winning screenplay's emotional core belonged to an uncredited hand. The film's most quoted line also has a hidden origin, and the consequences of that improvisation directly restructured the sequel. Number 7. After Paulie's execution, Clemenza delivers what may be the most perfectly calibrated line in the film. Cold efficiency followed immediately by domestic warmth. The balance is so exact it feels engineered. It was never written down. The original script contained only "leave the gun." Actor Richard Castellano playing Clemenza added, Take the Cannoli, based on a suggestion from his wife and scene partner, Ardell Sheridan. It was a callback to an earlier domestic scene where her character reminds Clemenza not to forget the cannoli. The improvisation turned a cold moment of gangland disposal into a perfect encapsulation of the film's central tension, the intersection of family warmth and brutal violence. Mark Seal titled his definitive production history of the film Leave the Gun, Take the Cannoli, in its honor. The line earned that distinction, but the improvisation carried lasting consequences. For The Godfather Part 2, Castellano demanded that Sheridan write all of his dialogue and insisted on a dramatic salary increase. Paramount refused both demands. Clemenza was killed off between the two films and replaced with the character of Pentangeli. The line that arguably defines The Godfather's tonal identity was never in the script. Its author's subsequent demands then erased the character who delivered it from the rest of the franchise. One scene in the film produced genuine screams of terror because the actor had absolutely no idea what he was about to touch. Number 6. Jack Woltz waking to find a severed horse head in his bed is one of cinema's most viscerally effective shock moments. Coppola wrote in his production notebook before filming, "If the audience does not jump out of their seats on this one, you have failed." Paramount wanted a prop. One was constructed. Coppola found it unconvincing and sent art director Warren Clymer to a dog food processing plant in New Jersey, where horses were being slaughtered for pet food. Clymer found a horse whose coloring matched Khartoum, the horse seen in earlier scenes, and instructed the plant to send the head when that specific horse was processed. It arrived on set packed in dry ice. Actor John Marley, who played Woltz, was not told that a real head would replace the prop used during rehearsals. When the cameras rolled and Marley pulled back the bed sheets, his bare toe reportedly brushed against it. His screams were not performance. They were genuine terror. Marley later appeared on The Dick Cavett Show and said he wanted to erase the moment from his memory entirely. Coppola clarified repeatedly that the horse was not killed for the film. It was already scheduled for slaughter at the processing plant before the production made contact. He addressed this publicly after receiving angry letters from animal rights advocates. One of cinema's most horrifying moments achieves its power in part because the actor's reaction is completely real. Number 5. The character of Johnny Fontane is one of the most transparently drawn figures in The Godfather, an Italian-American singer whose career has stalled, begging his godfather for help securing a film role that could revive everything. The parallels to Frank Sinatra are unmistakable. Sinatra recognized them completely. In 1970, at Chasen's restaurant in Los Angeles, a mutual acquaintance attempted to introduce Puzo to Sinatra, who was chatting with John Wayne at the time. Sinatra refused. When Puzo explained it was not his idea, Sinatra erupted. Per Puzo's own account in New York Magazine, contrary to his reputation, he did not use foul language at all. "The worst thing he called me was a pimp." Sinatra told Puzo that if he were younger, he would beat him up. As Puzo walked away, Sinatra shouted after him, "Choke! Go ahead and choke!" The Fontane parallels ran deep. Both were Italian-American singers whose careers revived through a key film role. The offer he can't refuse storyline echoed the documented account of mob boss Willie Moretti allegedly forcing bandleader Tommy Dorsey to release Sinatra from a restrictive contract at gunpoint. Puzo's reflection on the confrontation was characteristically dry. "What hurt was that here he was, a northern Italian threatening me, a southern Italian with physical violence. This was roughly equivalent to Einstein pulling a knife on Al Capone. The man who wrote The Don was publicly called a pimp by the man who inspired Johnny Fontane in a restaurant in front of witnesses." Number 4. Al Pacino's performance as Michael Corleone is one of the most studied in American cinema. The stillness, the controlled transformation from idealistic outsider to ruthless patriarch. It feels inevitable in retrospect. After the first 10 days of filming, the studio wanted to replace him. Pacino had made a deliberate acting choice. He played Michael as quiet, detached, and unreadable in the early scenes, building the character from the inside so the violent transformation would land with maximum force later. The studio watched the early footage and saw an actor who was doing nothing. Producer Robert Evans had called him that little dwarf during the casting fight. The studio had wanted Jack Nicholson, Robert Redford, Warren Beatty, or Ryan O'Neal. Now they were meeting to replace Pacino with one of them. Coppola took Pacino to the Ginger Man restaurant in New York and told him directly, "You know how much faith I had in you. Well, you're not cutting it." Pacino recalled feeling that statement in his stomach. He and Diane Keaton were so certain their careers were finished that they got drunk together most nights after returning to Manhattan. Coppola's masterstroke was rescheduling the Italian restaurant scene where Michael kills Sollozzo and McCluskey from later in the shoot to immediately. When the studio saw the footage, the resistance collapsed. Pacino later wrote, "Because of that scene, they kept me in the film." Number 3. After Francis Ford Coppola delivered his initial cut of The Godfather, Robert Evans sat down to watch it and arrived at a verdict: a long, bad trailer for a really good film. Then Evans did something no studio executive is supposed to do. He told Coppola to make it longer. Coppola's initial cut ran approximately 2 hours and 6 minutes. Evans directed him to restore the family scenes, the domestic texture, the quiet character moments that Coppola had trimmed to achieve a manageable running time, the wedding sequence, the conversations between family members, the breathing room that gives the violence its emotional weight. All of it went back in. The final theatrical release ran 2 hours and 55 minutes, nearly 50 minutes longer than Coppola's lean initial edit. Evans described this approach as the opposite of today's Hollywood procedure. When Paramount's head of distribution objected to the 3-hour running time, Evans did not yield. Producer Al Ruddy recalled, "He said, 'I'll quit before I cut the movie.' He saved the movie." Evans backed the filmmakers against his own distribution team. James Caan was still furious at the premiere that scenes developing Sonny's character had been cut. He confronted Evans directly. His words were not gentle. The family scenes that give the violence its devastating weight exist because a studio executive demanded they be restored against the director's initial instinct to cut them. The film's breathing room came from a production executive, not the filmmaker. Number 2. The moment Michael Corleone arrives in Sicily feels like a homecoming, a man reconnecting with roots that were always there. Most audiences read it as narrative. The reality is something closer to biographical. Al Pacino's maternal grandparents emigrated from Corleone, Sicily, the actual town, the same place from which the fictional Vito Corleone takes his surname. This is confirmed by Paramount's own 50th anniversary documentation. The actor who almost never made the film carried the name of the real place in his ancestry. Coppola originally planned to film the Sicily sequences in the real town of Corleone and scouted the location. He found it too modernized for the 1940s period setting. Production relocated to Savoca and Forza d'Agro near Taormina instead. Bar Vitelli in Savoca, where Michael negotiates for Apollonia's hand, still operates today with film memorabilia on its walls. Coppola has said he kept seeing the face of Al Pacino whenever he imagined those sequences, a recognition that he has described as going beyond typical casting logic. Pacino himself wrote in his memoir that he struggled to envision himself in the role, seeing Michael as someone more like Alain Delon. He could not picture himself carrying the film. Robert Evans called him that little dwarf. The studio fought his casting at every stage. The actor who almost never played Michael Corleone was the only actor whose family history made him a Corleone by blood. Number 1. The Godfather has always had a warmth that separates it from every film that tried to follow in its tradition, a sense that this is a real family, not assembled actors playing one. That quality is not manufactured. It was built into the production from the beginning. The Coppola family was literally embedded in the fiction. Sofia Coppola played the baby being baptized in the film's climactic sequence. Carmine Coppola, Francis's father, composed the wedding music heard throughout. Italia Coppola, Francis's mother, appears as a background extra at the wedding. Talia Shire, Francis's sister, played Connie Corleone. The director placed his actual family inside the story about family. Coppola also built the ensemble's chemistry through a practice that sounds simple and is rarely attempted at this scale. Before cameras rolled, the entire cast sat down together for improvisational rehearsal dinners where they ate family meals in character and could not break character for any reason. They learned each other's rhythms, tolerances, and instincts as people before they learned them as actors. John Cazale, who played Fredo, appeared in only 5 films across his entire career. All 5 were nominated for Best Picture. He died of lung cancer in 1978 while filming The Deer Hunter with Meryl Streep at his side. The Godfather earned $245 million on a $6.5 million budget, won 3 Academy Awards including Best Picture, and permanently altered the trajectory of American cinema. The Godfather exists because a novelist sold 60 unfinished pages to pay off gambling debts. 12 directors walked away before a near-bankrupt 31-year-old accepted on his friend's advice. The studio banned the lead actor's name from meetings, and then couldn't recognize him on screen. The cinematography began as a dental workaround. The score lost its Oscar to an anonymous informant. The most famous line was improvised by an actor's wife. The emotional centerpiece carried no screenwriting credit. The director survived by firing his own people first. None of it was guaranteed. If this video surprised you, drop your favorite fact in the comments, like, subscribe, and share this with someone who loves this movie as much as you do. And as always, I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse. We'll see you next time.